So Barry, a couple episodes ago, we announced this partnership that we're doing starting this year with this really great company, AEP Connections. And I see that we've added quite a few listeners since then. So do you want to give us a little bit of a refresher here, give our listeners a refresher on AEP Connections, who they are, and why we're partnering with them?
Yes, AEP Connections hosts live webinars. I've actually done some work with them, and it's always high-quality topics in neurodiversity. But they're building a library of on-demand courses now. And this summer, they're focusing on providing you with fantastic content at your fingertips. They have courses designed specifically for on-demand with many speakers on many important topics. However, many of their live presentations from this spring are also being made available for on-demand, so you can access them now. If you aren't able to see the courses live, be sure to check them out over the summer. Also, if you need approved provider hours, and it's really important for things such as licensure, they offer many, so be sure to check out the different courses and see the approvals from so many professional agencies.
Absolutely. I know, from Kristen's point of view, I always was hearing about, I'm as an SLP, I need more hours. I need more, professional development, and it's great. It's good to be on top of your craft in that way. So if anybody's looking for some discounts on professional development, AEP Connections, they actually have a few options. So they've got bundled packages, which will, save you money, but also by being a friend of Uniquely Human, the podcast, and AEP Connections, they are extending an additional discount code. So you can save an additional 10% on this offering just by entering the promo code UH10. That's UH10 in your checkout cart. Any topics that we should be aware of, Barry, that you're doing, for instance, that I should be signing up for?
Sure, yeah. And we're talking about Gestalt language processing. We talk about neurodiversity and issues related to that, but there are many other speakers as well. And it's a real cool perk that you get the 10% discount if you put UH10 or UH10 in your checkout cart. Check them out.
Awesome. The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we have two very, very special guests. Folks I'm actually involved in a much larger project with right now, and that is Dr. Josh Fader and Dr. Andrea Davis. So, Andrea and Josh, welcome to Uniquely Human, the podcast.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you. This is so fun to be with you today.
Yeah, it is absolutely our pleasure. And for Josh joins the two-time club. We have a few people who've been on more than once, and so now you have reached that level. There you go.
The last one I did is probably the most popular blog podcast on my website by far. Everybody loved our conversation last time, so hopefully this time's hitting another home run.
Yeah, and let's see if we could surpass that milestone. Little bit about you each. Josh is a child and family psychiatrist in Solana Beach, California, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Carlott Child Psychiatry Report. He serves as the medical director at Positive Development that provides affordable developmental relationship-based support for autistic children and their families. And we're going to be talking a lot today about developmental relationship based approaches. Josh co wrote the first American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry practice parameter on the assessment and treatment of autism spectrum disorder. And he's the author of two acclaimed books, Prescribing Psychotropics and The Child Medication Fact Book for Psychiatric Practice. Andrea is the founder of Greenhouse Therapy Center. She's a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in psychotherapy and parent support. As a graduate of Brown University's program in medicine's postdoctoral fellowship in early childhood psychology research and practice, and a former director of research at UCLA's Department of Pediatrics Focus Project, she brings experience and expertise in child development theory and research. She is the lead author of Greenhouse's DIR Floor Time Treatment Guide for Parents and Professionals, entitled Floor Time Strategies to Promote Development in Children and Teens. So we're going to dip into much of that, and we're actually going to be focusing on the development of guidelines and eventually certification for developmental relationship-based interventions. But we want to hear from you. So why don't we have Josh talk a little bit about his journey to get to where he is today, and then we'll follow that up with Andrea.
Wow. Well, long journey. The short version is my dad was autistic. My son is autistic. I got diagnosed at age 50 something. I don't know. I did it because my son didn't want to out himself in the employment world. And I thought, well, I should probably be a good role model. So I went ahead and did it. He went ahead and did it. Got a great job, by the way. He had been bouncing around between startups as an engineer. He's one of these kids who was regressed as a little kid, and they
Mm,
said to institutionalize him. And I'd already been trained in ABA, actually.
mm,
And my wife said, we're not going to institutionalize him. They said, oh, he's just going to be like a pet at home. Blah, blah, blah. We met Greenspan and Weeder, did developmental approaches, and he did go to an institution. He went to Cal Poly Pomona and graduated with honors in engineering. But then he went to startups, and he wasn't this guy who could interview, and he wouldn't pass the test, right? Do you want a beer with this guy? And he didn't want to out himself because he thought he'd be discriminated against. So for years, people have been sort of pointing out, my step, especially my wife, who's just amazing that she sticks with me. It's for our 40th year.
oh,
And so then he goes ahead and he gets a job with Caltrans here in California. And more recently, he's been really worried that by outing himself, he's now going to be on a target list because
mm,
he's not supposed to have a job and be a taxpayer. He's quite the taxpayer, by the way. He's got, he doesn't spend his money. He doesn't, he hangs out with his friends, but doesn't spend it. Just pays taxes. Anyway, so through his journey really is where I did
mhm,
a lot of my learning eventually in the 90s, actually getting with Greenspan and Weeder and through the years, working to bring more developmental approaches to other families to make it more affordable. So
mhm.
that's the short version.
Yes, and we're going to really dig in on that. Andrea, your journey and your path.
Wow. It, you mentioned being at Brown. We were at Brown together at the same time at
Oh,
Pendleton Bradley Hospital,
oh
where
yes.
we had a lot of children with autism who were there with us in a day program at the day school. And we didn't have a methodology at the time that I was being trained in, and I really longed for that, a more clear, specific guideline. And it was after that that I found what Stanley Greenspan was doing and teaching and training along with Serena Wieder, and it really changed my whole feeling about working with families affected by autism because there was hope. There was a path. There was a way to help these children grow and thrive and become spontaneous, joyful, warm, connected, imaginative, and just fully developing human beings. That was
Hmm.
what was really appealing to me, learning about DIR floor time. So I was practicing psychotherapy, traditionally outpatient mental health group practice that Greenhouse Therapy Center was, but we also started a program to offer families a DIR floor time experience in their home, in the community, wherever their child was experiencing problems. And we would come and help them with whatever goals that they needed to work on using this wonderful developmental approach. So it really changed my life actually to be meet Stanley and be trained in this wonderful approach that was so hopeful.
Hmm.
So the rest is history from there. There's a lot of history. It's a long story, but that's where it began way back in the 90s.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting how our individual paths kind of joined Stanley Greenspan's path. Coming back, being a speech language pathologist, I had already done a very, very deep dive into developmental approaches from focusing on communication, social communication, and then we expanded beyond that. And I had the chance to hang out with and present at Stanley's conferences for a few years. And I'll never forget, he sat me down and goes, "Barry, I really like your work, but you need to get more affect into it." Which, of course, was his major contribution in terms of really linking working with kids in a relationship-based, deeply emotional, affective manner, and with parents, of course. So, yeah, amazing. So let's talk about some of the recent exciting events that are happening right now. So, Josh, you recently published a paper with Dr. Diane Cullinane, who's a developmental pediatrician, and many other colleagues about developmental relationship-based interventions for autistic kids. So why did you get together? Some of you are researchers, some of you are practitioners. Why did you get together to write this paper? And by the way, there will be a link to this paper on the webpage for this podcast.
Yeah, it's a free open access paper, so anybody can access it, and it's short enough that it's not going to make your eyes kind of glaze over, hopefully. But with the field of developmental relationship-based interventions needs certain steps, developmental steps, if you will, to come into its own. Probably was it 6 years ago now? Michael Sandbank did that award-winning study, awarded by INSAR, the International Society for Autism Research,
Mm-hmm.
on effect sizes for different kinds of autism care. So she compared um, traditional ABA with developmental relationship-based approaches with the naturalistic kind of blended developmental behavioral approaches. And what she found was astounding, right? So she used pretty sophisticated math and essentially discovered that all that research on traditional ABA, which is, I don't want to get too into statistics, but most of it's multiple baseline studies where you get a group of people, you start some of them with care, the others you wait because they're waiting on a wait list, and then you check in with both groups a little later, and it would show that the people who were getting the ABA were able to whatever point to the green square or whatever they're supposed to do, and the ones who hadn't had that weren't doing as much pointing to the green square. Well, that sounds like legitimate research, but as it turns out, when you're trying to figure out how effective that truly is in helping someone function better in the world, it's not very good. So most of the research is like that. And what Sandbank found was that, and a group found was that you couldn't calculate an effect size of the intervention, but you could with the fewer but better organized studies for both developmental relationship-based interventions, and I'll define the core of what that means in a second, and the naturalistic developmental behavioral ones as well. And both of those had what we call a moderate effect size in improving social communication. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, the NDBIs also made people comply more, but that's kind of not what we're about. We're not about compliance. We want people to kind of be spicy and argue with us and learn to negotiate and problem solve. So we're not as good at that. We don't want to be. But in social communication, being able to functionally communicate, your intent and be able to talk with people about or communicate with people, however you do, in ways that are meaningful to you and help you move along, turned out pretty good. A moderate effect size doesn't sound all that big, but in medicine, it's a big deal. Most of our treatments in across the field of medicine are not very robust. So a lot of times you get something that's statistically significant, but it might mean that instead of living, 6 months after a certain diagnosis, you live 6 months in a day. And it's, a day is valuable, but it's not very much. It's not all that meaningful. So instead of just talking about statistically better, we look at the meaningfulness. What's the
Hmm.
effect size is what that's about. And so moderate effect sizes are a big deal in medicine. The only strong effect size that we talk about a lot in psychiatry is stimulant medication for ADHD symptoms is actually strong. But most of what we do, we're lucky if it's modest. So anyway, so this is like a big deal in, 2019, 2020, got a big award, blah, 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 and helped us to think about how we define this field of developmental relationship-based interventions. And like the field of the naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions, there was a development from defining what that meant to starting to get some cases together to starting to look at meta-analysis of the research in it. Well, Sandra kind of kicked that off for us, even though she's not really part of our developmental community. And Diane led this group as an amazing group, Serena Weider and Rick Solomon and a whole bunch of others. Late in the game, we were able to connect with Jonathan Green, who's supportive of supportive of the project as well. So all these people who do research in the field got together to try to just define what do we mean by
Hmm.
developmental relationship-based intervention, because there are a bunch of them out there that have some similarities, but unless you really define the field, then you don't know what to include when you're trying to say, oh, this approach works well. So the
Hmm.
core principles, anyway, of DRBIs is it's really like two core principles. One is that we recognize that and I'm quoting from the paper, there's an inherent desire of kids to engage socially, really people of any age, although the expression of that desire is influenced by neurologic individual differences.
Hmm.
So the idea is that people generally want to connect, right? If they don't, by the way, they might be depressed or there might be something else going on that we need to be thinking about. And then the second big principle is to build on parents or other caregivers' insight and knowledge of their child, bolster their confidence and facilitate increasingly complex and rich interactions for them. And that's like the engine for learning. And it's how everybody learns, right? So we just want to build on that. So that's in, contradistinction to training people to behave in a way we want them to. That's more the behaviorist way, which, has all the problems with generalization and teaching people to look what we think is normal and therefore masking and all that stuff. It's like the opposite approach. And the idea, obviously, is that families deserve informed consent. They deserve to know that there's more ways to help their kid than
Hmm.
just what's usually out there for them or
Hmm.
promoted to them, which is traditional ABA. Even the naturalistic approaches, although they can, depending on who's doing it, they can look very developmental or they can look like ABA. Even those, even though there's great research on those, there hasn't been much penetrance into the autism community, people getting those. In San Diego, there is, but in most parts of the country, and if you ask most
Hmm.
autism treatment companies, most of them behaviorists, they don't really know from the naturalistic stuff, and
Hmm.
they just hate the developmentalists because I don't know, we're taking their market share.
Well, in San Diego, especially because Dr. Laura Schreibman's there, just
Right.
a little ditty that you guys don't know about, but one of my longtime colleagues, co-author of our CERTS model, Emily Rubin, studied with Laura undergraduate and then came to study with me because she didn't want to be so ABA. She wanted to be more developmental.
Mhm.
And now she's a credible colleague of mine. She was a student of mine at Emerson. But I think you're raising some very, very important points here, and that is parents just trying to figure out the lay of the land. And we used to refer to what now is called NDBI as hybrid approaches, basically what people refer to as the kinder, softer ABA. But if you look, why is it kinder and softer? Because it's taken elements of child and family centered and developmental approaches and infused it on top of what they're doing. I don't want to go ahead without Andrea being able to chime in. I know you're just sitting there like chomping at the
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
No, I'm actually really enjoying hearing you. I'm nodding along and smiling, but if someone's listening to the podcast, they can't see all the nodding and smiling. No, Absolutely. When you talk about Barry having parents aware and having that being armed with the knowledge, that's what I've been working on. I've been working on advocacy for many years
Mm-hmm.
together with Josh Fader and Dr. Diane Cullinane, who wishes she could be here, but she's on a plane with her family. So that we've been working on advocacy in a number of different ways,
Mm-hmm.
mainly to make it possible for families to access an option of a developmental approach to helping their child.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first big and longest effort so far was in California. We actually put forth a bill in California 6 different times. It took that many times and being blocked that 5 times. And then the sixth time in 2023, we were thrilled, and all families across California were thrilled that we actually got across the goal line, got across the finish line, and we passed SB 805, which was signed into law uh, in October 2023 and will go into effect not until 2026. But once it does, it means that insurance companies have to cover all evidence-based approaches.
Mm-hmm.
They have to, therefore, go ahead and yes, so families can say to their insurance company, I would like this approach. This is what my doctor has said would work best for my child. If it's ABA, great. If it's another approach, if it's a developmental approach like we're going to be talking about today, fabulous. And that can be covered, and that can be mean access for families who in the past traditionally it was typically wealthy families who were able to pay out of pocket for these kinds of services. It can be lengthy, can be more intensive. It's not like a once a week kind of go to the office for a traditional hour of help. It's providing help where the child or adolescent needs the help. If it's with their siblings, if it's with their friends in the neighborhood, if it's with the issues at home, wherever they're experiencing some sort of challenges, this will now be a way for families to get that support where it's needed,
Mm-hmm.
but from providers who are trained in one of the evidence-based approaches that falls under the umbrella of developmental approaches, which is just great news for families in California. We hope that as goes California, so goes the nation. So we're working on advocacy efforts elsewhere. We've started with Texas. We want to work in South Carolina, New York, Massachusetts. There's some great initiatives already that happened in states like Minnesota, New Jersey, in Illinois, where Medicaid policy was changed to cover explicitly one of the developmental approaches, the best known one, DIR floor time. So we are just working to get the word out. So
Mm-hmm.
our dream would be pediatricians everywhere would know to tell families. They're the first point of contact, and they would know to tell families, here, there's choices. And you can explore, and we think this might work for your child one way or the other, but you have an option, and your insurance will cover. You won't be discriminated against. There will be equitable coverage. That's what we're working towards.
Mm-hmm.
What Andrea isn't telling you is that she's been such a leader in this. I mean, she's really been the prime mover and organizer. We kind of, just she helps me figure out what's my next thing that I need to do to try to help these things move forward. But there's so many moving parts and so many people working against us at
Mm-hmm.
committee level, at all kinds of levels, trying to really just maintain hegemony of the ABA model in
Mm-hmm.
large part. So it's been an uphill battle, and with very little funding, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they might have $500,000 in lobbying funds available to work against us, and we got bupkis. We used to raise a little bit of money, but we don't even bother anymore. We're
You
just
know,
all volunteers.
just
The other thing I want to do before I forget is to plug Andrea's book. So as a practical thing, when people say, well, how can I understand this stuff? Her book is so straightforward, gives great strategies and ideas, and I recommend it all the time. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
fabulous. So
And we'll have a link to that on the website. One thing I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking who are familiar with some of the work that I've done with colleagues, and it's kind of interesting if you think of the history here, that in the Sandbank study, CERTS was originally included under the hybrid ABA, the NDBI, and it was like, what? Why didn't you ask me? We come from a very deep developmental background, one that's very, very close to the work of Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and that's the transactional model of child and human development, and Arnold Samaroff. So it's kind of interesting. And just to be clear, we're talking about that umbrella that encapsulates the DIR model, that encapsulates the Play Project, that encapsulates PACT, that encapsulates, and the article kind of says that, but unfortunately at that time people thought we were NDBI, so we're not there, and we're certainly not that.
Can I speak to that confusion just a little bit?
Sure.
So I think, because there were people who characterized you that way, then people heard that, and it's how the information sort of burgeons out, right?
Yes.
So one person says you're in that, and then Sandbank didn't know better. But moving forward, she's told me that if she does another one of these studies, that she would include you under the DRBI umbrella, which is only appropriate. I mean, I was sitting there with your book just this week and seeing, yep, development. Like, how could you not see that? Well, maybe, if you're told one thing and you don't understand it. If you're coming from a different point of view, you just don't, you really understand. So that gets to the point of people who are doing research on us from the outside and doing their best. And the advantage of that is that it's not just us doing it and seeming biased on the one hand, but on the other hand, sometimes there's misunderstandings that come up. And that was a big one.
Yes.
But we'll correct it moving forward.
Yeah, I think that sort of spread of misinformation is so relevant today. And that's exactly what a lot of our advocacy efforts have been about, is to fight the misinformation campaign.
Yes.
Explicitly commercial. It was about a monopoly of only one choice. Back in the very, very beginning, Autism Speaks, we just learned this last year, had discussed very explicitly passing legislation in 50 states that would cover any approach, not just ABA. And then it was a strategic decision. Actually, it's such a difficult thing to pass these laws, because it was the very first time that insurance would be required to cover people coming into your home and helping your family. So they decided to pare down and say, we'll just pass laws that require coverage for ABA, and later we'll circle back and we will then amend those laws and expand to other approaches. Well, they haven't done that yet, but that's what we are doing now with the DIR Floor Time Coalition. We are trying to fix that misinformation campaign, that there's only one approach that's scientifically based, that's studied, that's evidence-based, that's research-based. That's the misinformation that we are facing every day when we do our advocacy work. And we even help. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, I was going to say that's how ABA got to be the approach that, most insurance companies said they would cover. The misinformation, and, I lived through this era, these eras very specifically, was that ABA was the only thing that worked. First, it was about cure, then it was about recovering. It was the only thing that recovered kids from autism. And this was said over and over, first by Lovas, indistinguishable from your peers, and on and on and on. And, all along we're saying, well, all the evidence we have is we're talking about a lifelong developmental difference. We're not talking about cure. We're not talking about recovery here. And what would any parent go to? But what I'd like both of you to talk a little bit about, and also Dave, feel free to chime in on this. And that,
I put on a collared shirt. I might as well say something.
Right. But that's the issue of parental instincts. How many, you've all met parents, you've lived this maybe, where a professional says to you, you need to do this approach, and it clashes with your instincts as a parent and your expertise about your son or daughter. And we've seen the fallout of that. We've seen parents come to just this isn't working or it doesn't feel right in my gut. Because a lot of parents are intuitively developmental.
So Mother's Day is tomorrow,
Yes,
and my wife is the best mom my kids could have had. I mean, just unbelievable. She's the one who looked, who heard Magda Campbell, who's like one of these queens of
sure.
autism care out of Bellevue, right back in the 80s and 90s. She was visiting Hawaii, so I was in child psychiatry fellowship. That's like grade 26 or 27, whatever, something like that, learning about child psychiatry as our kid is diagnosed, whatever. And she's this expert coming in to give a talk at our program at Triple Army Medical Centers, like during the first Gulf War and blah blah blah. Anyway, so he's diagnosed, and we're wondering, what do we do? Magda Campbell happens to be visiting. She's an amazing autism expert, and she says, "Well, he should be institutionalized at UCLA. That's what you should do." My wife is like, "No." Right. And like I alluded to earlier, she says, well, then he's just going to be like a pet. She was so wrong, Magda Campbell. My wife was so right. And you know, what's the outcome? A connected son 35 years later. And by the way, little sister who kind of grew up in Serena Weider's office nursing, you know,
And
is
Serena, of course, long time colleague of Dr. Stanley Greenspan. Yes.
right,
Yep.
right. So we work with Greenspan and Weider with Michael. So anyway, and Molly is happily pregnant now with a boy. Not that I haven't arranged OT already, but um, the fact that, what does it say about a mom whose kid wants to have a kid and whose other kid is super connected, and went with her gut and knew what the right thing was, right?
Mhm.
So I was like, well, I guess we have to do ABA. She's like, no, we need to keep them at home and, interact.
So for parents um, who are listening, who are thinking like, okay, this is a very crucial decision that I have to make here. I've got this huge marketing arm that's nationwide telling me like, if you want your kid to grow up and be an effective human being, they've got to be able to shake hands and sit down for an interview and not jiggle their legs and yakety yak yak. That seems very tempting, but now you've got, hopefully, there will be this reversal of misinformation or this clearing it up and saying like, actually, if you interview people who kind of came up in an ABA treatment approach and versus somebody who came up in more of a developmental approach. So is there I know that in order to get any sort of legislation passed or in effect, you obviously need all the evidence-based and clinical data. It all has to be very tight and buttoned up and clean. Is there an element of this where individuals on the spectrum can come and also help to advocate for developmental, saying like, "Hey, I've got no complaints. I'm wouldn't you know it? I'm a taxpayer who can write poems. Go figure." Against all odds, I was able to make words rhyme. Is there a is there a
Take that, RFK.
Yeah, I want to pitch it over to Andrea to talk about Diane Cullimane's most recent version of her white paper that has a whole bunch of research in it. But I want to tee it up just a little bit because we're really talking about the entire spectrum, however you conceptualize that. There are non-speaking people. There are people who aren't going to be taxpayers, and that is, oh, I mean, that is just who they are, and that's okay. What is our humanity if we're not about everybody, including people who might not have a workaday job, right? So, on the one hand, Temple Grandin would say, and I think correctly, that you need to learn how to use deodorant and not be, I don't know, dropping your food on people or whatever it is that would make it impossible for you to get along with people. So there are things we do need to learn. It's just that the way that you learn those, if you're going to, is best through, I think, a developmental approach. And then for people who might not be on that track for a job and paying taxes, how do we make life more meaningful for them? And I would argue that developmental approaches help those lives feel more meaningful and less distressed about just trying to do what we're telling you to do. But Andrea really has the bead on the level of research that's there now. So please.
Well, I can tell a story that one of our advocacy efforts was to actually fight the misinformation campaign with in a couple of court hearings in California this year,
Yeah.
where the funding agencies were repeating the myth that ABA is the only evidence-based approach. And we just were able to, with Diane Cullinane's help, expert help, bury the judge in evidence, in papers that were that it was too much. I mean, he was the best and most attentive judge, but his eyes were glazing over after a while because there's so much data now on developmental approaches being successful and not only in improving significant foundational capacities of a child to have a functional, happy life, of being able to have good social communication, but also impacting the families, impacting the parents, lowering their stress levels. So Diane every year updates her white paper, her self-published annotated bibliography of all the evidence supporting DIR, developmental individual differences relationship-based approach, and all the related approaches that fall under developmental approaches. And I have the fun task of being the copy editor. And this year, I'll tell you, it took me a lot longer because there's just something coming out. She keeps finding something every week or every month. So there's a lot more now, and it's exciting. And now something you mentioned, Dave, was that we think the next step is what's called a phenomenological study, where we're going to be asking those questions of people who've been lived experience of families and clients themselves. What is it like, and how does it feel to be the recipient of services from providers who've been trained and steeped in a developmental approach, which I always want to say is from the beginning, neurodiversity affirming. Back before that was a term, back before this was a movement, back in the 70s, looking at people's individual, unique profile, their neurobiological profile, and adapting the people and the environments around that person is fundamentally neurodiversity affirming. So that's what we want to know now from the people who received it. What was that like for you? What's your impression? Because, and of course, all of our research needs to include people with lived experience, and they are our experts in our, designing our research and in designing new research and designing our methods. So we need that. You're right, Dave. We need to hear from the people who actually received the care. And I mean, Josh, you've talked about your family receiving Stanley right from the masters, from Stanley Greenspan and Serena Weeder, but we need lots and lots of voices like that telling us.
And let me just chime in. Some of that's out there. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, has supported developmental approaches, and I know they speak positively about the CERTS model. They speak positively about DIR. We have relationships with them, and I believe that I saw a survey, I believe it was taken in 2022, Chris Bonello, who's out of the UK, and he's on the spectrum, and I think he had this huge survey of 11,000 neurodivergent people, of which 7,000 had an autism diagnosis. And I believe one of the questions he asked was their impressions of ABA or their experiences, and it was not very positive at all. But I think just want to toss something in very quickly. It's not only misinformation that's put out there, it's ignoring accurate, valid information that's out there. So I haven't checked it lately, but there's a website, ASAT, the Association for Science and Autism Treatment, which is an ABA website, and they have reviews of research and they post reviews of research. And we have an evidence basis of certs going back 10 years. And last time I looked for certs, on that website that's supposed to be up to date reviewing research, it said something like either no research or no methodologically sound research, which is not the case at all. We have this whole paper reviewing research. So it's also almost like we're not going to even look at what other people are doing.
On purpose. It's on purpose. It's so intentional. And unfortunately, that's what we've run into with families who went and tried to challenge their insurance companies and said, look, this approach is helping my child. That's evidence for me. And they would come back with their ancient, dusty, moldy medical guidance policies and guidelines that say what they can cover. And they had a couple of studies from before 2000, and they intentionally ignore everything that's happened since then in terms of the world has changed. We have really good evidence, and it's intentionally ignored over and over and over. It's just easier to do what you know. It's easier to listen to the myth that's repeated, and it's really been an uphill battle. That's why I said it took us in California 6 tries. That's because there were people in the governor's ear every time telling them something else. The legislature was all for us. It was always saying, yes, yes, we don't want a monopoly. Science isn't about commercial interest. We want parents to have a choice. We would have parents, fly up to Sacramento, would take the day off from caring for their autistic kids and tell their stories. The legislators understood immediately from those, again, lived experiences, the stories of how their families have been completely transformed by a developmental approach. But then there would be people in the bureaucrats talking to the governor saying this will harm children if they get anything other than ABA.
Culture change takes a long time, and it's partly because just what Andrea said, the insurance
I've been
companies,
accused of
the
that for decades.
Department of Developmental Services and other organizations are embedded with people who are very much beholden to the old model. They only believe that'll help, and I think they truly believe that other kinds of approaches will in fact harm the kids. So I think that many of them truly, truly believe that what they're doing is the right thing, but getting that to shift is, really difficult. You have to wait for generational change, really, and to be out there educating the new generations, so that they understand that there's other ways to go. What's been really gratifying is that when the AMA changed their policy last year, it was medical students who had connections with people with developmental challenges who basically suggested the policy change. These are basically kids, right? Med students are kids. um, and they were able to affect that, relatively rapidly and easily. Whereas me, I've been working with the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry since 2017 to try to shift their policy. And because ABA is very entrenched in the people who are part of it, it's been a long slog. And the fact that the AMA did it last year really helped. And before that, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Now I'm losing track of the years. Was it 2024 or 2023 when the AMA changed it? It might have been 2023. Um, yeah. And that's what got me kicked off back to ACAP to try to get them to shift. But cultural change takes a lot of work, and that's really what we're trying to affect here.
Well, if I could just chime in quickly, and then take it, Dave, after this. Developmentalists are not very good at marketing. And I mean, I could go back and talk about, I'm not going to name names, but at the time, leaders in ABA crashing into meetings and handing out these brochures, and we have the only thing that works. And I mean, really heavy-handed marketing, to the extent that parents who didn't even understand my or our approach, who were invested emotionally in ABA, would say we were destroying kids. And they didn't even understand what we were saying at the time. And it's hard to hear that, especially when it's so much misinformation. Dave.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, and when you have the support of an entire industry, like you said, there's what's the motivation for any insurance company? Well, first of all, what is the motivation for an insurance company to ever do the right thing, which is 0% of the time? Oh my gosh, we have to pay money out for the thing that you're paying us money so we pay it out? No, we're not going to do that, right? But when you have the whole backing of that, like who would have thought that it's easier for two parents to walk down the street and buy a bag of weed from a store, like right next to Starbucks, and not have to look over your shoulder on your way back to your car than it is to get the care you need for your child. Like, that's how I would say insidious. I mean, that it's such an uphill battle when you're fighting smear campaigns, and you are a group of people. This is so funny. You could look at this, how it parallels politics too. Like, do you side with the people who are just attack smear campaigns and what we say is right because that's what we want, and everybody else can go pound sand? Or do you side with the people who are so focused on actually making positive societal change and doing things maybe the right way, that they're not spending all of their efforts on talking louder than everyone else in the room?
Mm-hmm.
You're right, Dave. You're right. And what's really exciting, both Josh and I work with positive development, and he hasn't talked about the research he's done on the positive development model, which is a developmental model, which is, again, neurodiversity affirming, embracing the family, empowering the families to attune to their children and support their children's intent, initiative, creativity. This model is showing great effects already just after 6 months. And another study that was presented at ACAP, 12 months, just 12 months, with so many fewer hours, so much actually cheaper for the insurance companies. And this is the idea, is that we can get help, meaningful help to families using a developmental approach, but also using really experts in working with insurance companies at positive development, so they can get really on tracks and they can present this kind of data to the right people at the insurance company who are going to go, hey, that sounds better. Like, it has more meaningful outcomes. It takes fewer hours per week for the family or the provider, for the insurance company to pay for. And it, as Barry was saying, aligns better with the family's values of how do we want to raise our child. So it's very exciting. It's a startup that's in several states now and has a big dream of, we want to be in every state, so every family can access this kind of care and afford it. And that's what we're sort of spending our, burning the midnight oil to get this going and to get it out for families everywhere. It's growing. I mean, we have more and more families signing up, more and more clinics opening up in more and more cities. So very excited about the options there.
It really is the undertaking of a lifetime, because not only do you have that side of the equation, the other side of the equation is training and educating the professionals, the clinicians, in developmental approaches, and that's a whole other systemic piece to this. It's such an
so
enormous,
we have trying to scale these things. There've been a lot of these private clinics which mostly took self-pay for years, and that's right. Our mission at PD is to try to make this available to everybody, make it accessible to Medicaid recipient families, as well as to private insurance. Insurance companies do like it because it's less expensive. We like it because we can show it works and it helps families, and families are happier. But one of the things about doing research is you want legitimate research. So I've published a couple times on it, and it good results. But now we've got Stanford planning to do an external review of what we do. Lawrence Fung there is really enamored of us, and it's just great to have an outside person doing it. And we're transparent. When we have discussions with insurance companies, we talk about what our outcomes look like, and it is so refreshing to them, because the ABA companies don't do that, or they only publish their internal studies of, oh yeah, kids got better. But we're like showing our data and showing our processes, working on, making sure our fidelity is good. I won't get into the technical, and we're having outside people look at us. So it's very legitimizing. But the other thing we're doing, insurance companies need to know that people who say they do developmental approaches are doing it in a legitimate way. And so, as you are aware, the
with
ABA
fidelity,
people,
yes,
right.
That's part of marketing is oppositional, right?
Right. But
Pushback.
Andrea, again, she's just so humble. Andrea's actually leading the development of a national certification board. And you should talk for a minute about that,
Yes,
Andrea.
absolutely.
It's really exciting. Positive Development has tasked me with getting this launched. It will eventually be completely independent, and that's what you need is you've got your training organizations that train the providers in the different developmental approaches, but you need an independent nonprofit board
Mhm.
that certifies these people as legitimately trained, prepared, qualified, and they're doing what they say they're doing. So that is what we're gathering momentum, we're gathering support from giants in the field like Dr. Barry Prezant and
Oh, please.
others who are very excited about this. Rick Solomon, we've got people, all kinds of folks just climbing on board saying that we've needed this in our field for so long. Let's do it. So we'll need to have a test, just like other organizations. If you think of people who go for a medical specialization, they have to be tested by an independent body, not the training
Hmm.
body. And
Absolutely.
so we will be able to do that for all levels. So we're talking about, yes, your licensed healthcare providers will need to be approved and certified, your sort of mid-level kind of supervisor folks, and then your direct care folks who are we call paraprofessionals will also need to pass a test and pass muster that they're doing what we say when we say a developmental relationship-based approach. So that will assure the public, but probably more importantly, assure the funding sources, the payers, the commercial payers, the Medicaid boards, the states who are going to be passing these laws,
Hmm.
all want to hear this. I went up to Sacramento to talk about our bill a couple of years ago, just before we got over the finish line. The first question I got from a senator was, well, do you have a national certification process for this approach? And it was like, we're working on it. And now we really legitimately are working on it. And so it's very, very exciting to be on
Hmm.
this project.
Yeah. Mhm. You
Yep.
know, when we talk about fidelity, which you just raised, and this is my bias, this is one person's opinion. Um, when I observe teachers, therapists, OTs, SLPs, I could tell by watching them if they're based in a developmental kind of relationship based perspective. Yet I could go into programs or observe professionals that call themselves coming out of applied behavior analytic approaches, and it's varied greatly. It's incredible. I mean, it's just, I don't see the fidelity, especially between NDBI and people who've not moved from more traditional into NDBI. But anyway, um, so I know many of our listeners probably want to get involved. You know, how can they follow what's going on? How can they get more involved? And of course, our listeners vary from parents to neurodivergent adults. We have the full range here. So yeah.
Yeah, we want to get everybody involved. Our coalition, the DIR Floor Time Coalition, has always been a combination of providers and parents. We want everyone to get involved. So right now, the best way to do it is our Facebook group called the DIR Floor Time Coalition. That's a group they can apply to. Just answer a couple of quick questions that
Hmm.
say that you're a real person, basically, and then you can find out more just by being in that group. If any announcements are coming up, any changes, one of the big changes is that we will be broadening our brand. We will be changing the name to the Coalition of Developmental Approaches.
Hmm.
So over time, we want people to get used to the fact that we want to be inclusive. It's not just DIR floor time that's important, that families have access to certs, that they have access to PAC, play project, the responsive teaching model, whichever one is available in their area, but
Hmm.
also fits for their family. So we'll be rebranding. But right now, it's still called the DIR Floor Time Coalition. That's a group on Facebook that they can find out what's happening, get involved, roll up their sleeves and help us out. We need help in every state. We need
Hmm.
people to go to their local legislator and talk to them about this issue. And we can
Hmm.
empower them. We'll give them materials, we'll give them talking points, we'll let them know what the next step is in their state.
Hmm.
And people can learn more about the model. If you don't know a whole lot about developmental models, you can go to the Perfectum Parent Toolbox online for free and get training as a parent and how to do that particular approach, right? You can
Mhm.
get Andrea's book and you can apply these things. It's always better to have professional assistance, obviously.
Mhm.
But it's out there. There are things out there. There's Diane's white paper, which is going to be posted if it's not already posted, the new one on the Floor Time Coalition Facebook page or website. And then the other thing is when we make a push for legislation, we need families to write letters. It is incredibly powerful when you flood a legislative
Mhm.
office with letters, how you can get things to move through committees, how you can make sure that people vote in a way that improves access for all kinds of evidence-based approaches so that families have choices. So we rely on getting lots of participation, lots of letters from individuals and maybe their companies, if they're treatment companies or whether they're just something else. I mean, we need that kind of participation. So educating yourself as well as staying in touch with us. So when we have outreach in your state, we can count on you to write a letter and to be engaged.
Mhm. And let me just emphasize, the so often stated quote, "Nothing about us without us." We're getting tremendous support from the self advocate community. They look at our goals. They look at our respect to not fix, but to really understand the development of people and help support that development in ways that lead to quality of life outcomes. And I think we all feel that when we have that support and the family support, we're doing something right. So, in addition to the research that shows that we're doing something right. So, yeah. All right, guys.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And hopefully, our listeners will really kind of continue to follow the evolution of DRBI. And the goals will be reached. Some of the goals have already been reached, and we'll just have to continue working on that. So
Thank
take
you
care,
so much.
Andrea
It's
and
so
Josh.
great to be here. So
Yes,
great to be here.
thank you. Thanks,
We're
Andrea.
honored to have you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is so awesome to be talking about what we think about every day, every hour. It's just exciting to share it with you and your listeners because you have such a wonderful, vibrant, active, and knowledgeable listenership. So we're really, really fortunate that you invited us to talk to y'all today.
Great. Thanks
Thank you.
so much.